Hello, everybody. Alexandria Anthony, one half of World Paranormal Research Society. Welcome and greetings to everyone, all of our listeners. Thank you to everyone that is subscribing. Means a lot. Timothy will be joining us in up-and-coming future shows. We look forward to his return. Today's show really, and I'm going to put this statement out for everybody, knowledge is our invisible cloak of armor, folks. We all know in the past and into the present, knowledge equals power, power equals control, and that goes all the way back to ancient times and trickles into the present time. As a historian, I like to bring ancient civilizations to the forefront into modern times. Today's show is going to be a perfect example of that. As paranormal researchers, we know knowledge is so very, very important in every single aspect of all that we do. We need to be armed with knowledge for every investigation, every situation that we encounter. That is key even to survival. So, folks, knowledge indeed is our invisible cloak of armor. And today we're going to pose another question to you. Does Atlantis have a connection to the Amazon or Ecuador? And we're going to sort of give you a little bit of a history lesson here. The lost city of Atlantis was first mentioned by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato more than 2,300 years ago. And it really is, folks, one of the oldest and greatest mysteries of the world. According to Plato, the utopian island kingdom existed some 9,000 years before his time and mysteriously disappeared one day. Plato talks about the mysterious underwater kingdom and wrote this, and I quote, "For the ocean there was at that time navigable, for in front of the mouth which you Greeks call, as you say, the Pillars of Hercules, there lay an island which was larger than Libya and Asia together, and it was possible for the travelers of that time to cross to other islands, and from islands to the whole of the continent over against them, which encompasses the veritable ocean." So there's also another legend that says the Atlantis city was built by Poseidon, who was the god of sea, storms, and earthquakes. When he fell in love with a mortal woman, Cletio, he made this city on top of a hill in an isolated island in the sea to protect her and named it Atlantis. According to the story, Poseidon walked through the world in an effort to find the biggest island until he reached the biggest of them all, Atlantis, and found it to be inhabited by people who were more beautiful, and here is where the term knowledge comes in, and intelligent than the rest of the world. It was then he fell in love with Cleito when he finds her in the island. And the fertile and beautiful city of Atlantis, where half God and half human beings lived, is believed to have been a self-sufficient region where people grew their own food and reared animals. Farmers in the city used to grow the crops in the fertile plains on the outskirts with the help of a well-maintained irrigation system. They also built beautiful buildings and other architectures from material like black and red stone. They also had access to rare metals, keep that term rare metals in the forefront, and even alloys like brass. They also made and used crystals extensively for leisure and experimental purposes, and had a lot of free time to even play with volcanoes. And other than the legend of the lost city of Atlantis and other fables, the fact about the city still remains unknown. And among historians and other researchers, the findings of Edgar Cayce had something very different to tell. Edgar Cayce believed in the rising of the lost city once again, like the sun rises from the sea. He predicted a new land would appear off the east coast of North America. He also suggested that the souls of a number of people lived in Atlantis had been reincarnated to America in order to usher in a new era of enlightened human consciousness. So you're probably thinking, what are these conspiracy theories? What is this age of conspiracy? Hidden knowledge? Again, knowledge is power. Seek truth and find answers, and you'll be able to live free. So there is a lot of hidden secret knowledge out there, and you're probably saying to yourself, what does the lost city of Atlantis have to do with Ecuador or the Amazon? Well, I'm going to get right into it up close and personal right now, folks. And I don't know if some of you have heard of Father Carlos Crespi. Father Carlos Crespi was born in 1891 in Legnano, Italy. He became a priest and he was sent to Ecuador during the 20th century. And folks, as the story goes, Father Crespi was so loved by the local villagers that some of the tribes that lived in the rainforests began bringing him amazing artifacts as gifts. These artifacts, claimed the indigenous tribes, came from secret caves under the rainforest and had been left there by their ancestors. Many of the artifacts were destroyed in a fire. And another correlation, similarity from the old time to the new times, quite interesting, is just like the Alexandria Library was burnt to the ground, many of the artifacts were destroyed in a fire that ravaged the place they were being stored in 1962. And Father Crespi did manage to save some of the pieces, but those two disappeared after Father Crespi's death in 1982. And you're probably figuring, what does Father Crespi have to do with the lost city of Atlantis? Hidden secret knowledge? We're going to get right into it right now. Some people believe the story about Atlantis that was first told by the Greek philosopher Plato is an accurate tale of a historical civilization that was destroyed sometime around basically the end of the last ice age. People that believe in this theory think that the survivors of the catastrophe that destroyed Atlantis were scattered across the globe starting new civilizations wherever they landed. And if you take this theory, the Father Crespi artifacts look so very similar to Egyptian, and you're going to see pictures throughout this show, Egyptian and Sumerian artifacts, because if you use this theory, all of these civilizations were started by the survivors of Atlantis. And another train of thought, another theory about the Father Crespi artifacts is that they were indeed the treasures of the Temple of Solomon. Then really, if you take that theory, then what is still hidden in the caves the indigenous people found? So if you take that theory and Father Crespi just had some of them, can you imagine what is still hidden in those caves? And it also said tribesmen spoke of golden books. Could these be the original copies of the Old Testament? Could the Ark of the Covenant be hidden in underground Ecuador? And it's also quite interesting that Crespi was a monk again who was born in Italy in 1891. He studied anthropology at the University of Milan before becoming a priest. And in 1923, he was assigned to the small Andean city in Ecuador to work among the indigenous people. And it was there that he devoted 59 years of his life to charitable work until his death in 1982. Over that time, folks, wrap your head around this number if you can. Father Crespi acquired more than 50,000 objects, many of which were kept in the courtyard of the church until the Vatican. Here we have the Vatican sticking their nose in. The Vatican gave him permission to start a museum to house the collection. And again, as we stated previously, unfortunately, many of the artifacts were destroyed in a fire in 1962. And after Father Crespi passed away, the remaining artifacts were removed and little trace of them remained. Therein lies the conspiracy theory, the mystery. Various claims began to emerge as to what happened to the artifacts that survived the fire. Some say that they were stored in a cellar archive. Others say they were sold to private collectors. Or some even think they were shipped off to the Vatican. Absolutely amazing, folks. And we're going to go into really some more detail. And it's interesting to note that there's a connection between Father Crespi's treasures to a reading again by Edgar Cayce, and they give the description of the Atlantean colonies in Ecuador. And again, Father Crespi again came to Ecuador as a missionary, and he befriended the indigenous Shuar people, and he learnt of an ancient treasure they had sworn to protect hidden within a network of underground tunnels. And as newly converted Christians, these indigenous people wanted to share with their priest these amazing artifacts, golden sarcophagi from Egypt, bronze plaques depicting famous scenes from antiquity bearing Phoenician writing. There was copper wheels and gears as hard as steel, very strange machines, and many other objects. And Father Crespi faithfully maintained the collection until just before his death, when the Ecuadorian government purchased it from the church, they say, and many of these priceless treasures were lost forever. So I find it absolutely fascinating when we're talking about conspiracy theories, we're talking about secret knowledge. And can you imagine the people from Atlantis, after the catastrophe struck, the survivors went out into the known world to start civilizations, they say, such as Egypt, Sumeria, Babylonian, carrying that knowledge with them to these civilizations. It could be plausible that they did end up in the Amazon, in Ecuador, and having treasure and knowledge that is so vast, you wouldn't want to keep it in one place. It would be plausible that they were buried in underground caves in the Amazon, in Ecuador, and the indigenous people were sworn by their ancestors to protect these artifacts. And some of the artifacts that were given to Father Crespi from the indigenous people were, in fact, hammered together, crudely manufactured by the indigenous parishioners, but there were at least a few that really showed expertise and old world mythical scenes that would be completely unknown to these indigenous people. The Indians also gave Father Crespi sheets of hammered gold embossed with implicable designs in exquisitely wrought solid silver statuettes of Near Eastern deities. They were warehoused again at his mission, but didn't come to the attention of the outside world until 1970. Even so, Father Crespi had few visitors beyond his remote congregation, and he never tried to interest archaeological authorities in his collection. And again, Father Crespi passed away in 1989, and it does say in one theory the gold and silver items were partially confiscated by agents of the Vatican who tried to smuggle them out of the country, but they were apprehended by customs authorities before all the artifacts could be removed. And Ecuadorian government authorities seized what objects remain, but refused to allow public access to them. So absolutely amazing. And again, while there were primitive examples among the collections are obvious enough, the massive amount of gold and silver, some of it fashioned into beautiful artwork, seems less easily dismissed. However, links to North African refugees are apparent in some of the Syrian motifs in a few of the artifacts. So let's put this into perspective. I've began the show and told you all, and this I'm a firm believer of this. Knowledge is our invisible cloak of honor, of armor. Everything we should do should have knowledge. We should seek knowledge. Knowledge is power. Power equals control. So, since the very beginnings of time, the holders and the keepers of secret, hidden knowledge have had the power and control over civilization. And even in ancient times, it is now happening in modern times. We have governments around the world that have the knowledge, and that is a way to control the people. Control the people. So, in effect, it is a way of dummying up the public, because the keepers of the knowledge hold all the cards, contain the power. Power equals control. I hope that this episode has spurred you a passion to seek answers, seek knowledge. Do some research. Find out more about Father Carlos Crespi and how this missionary from Italy ended up in Ecuador, and how he was given the privilege by indigenous people of a huge treasure that they claim they found in a cave left by their ancestors that had Egyptian, Sumerian, and Phoenician artifacts. So he did learn of this treasure in 1923, and again, there are people with the train of thought that some say evidence suggests that the civilization responsible for these artifacts was Atlantis. So, where are the Father Crespi artifacts, and why isn't the world allowed to see them? Why aren't they put into a museum where the public can go and see it? Again, it is about knowledge. Knowledge equals control. Control equals power. So, since the beginning of time, folks, there has been individuals that keep hidden, secret knowledge by tight purse strings for a way of controlling people, folks. So do some more research. Find out about various fascinating topics. Like they've said, every legend begins with a tidbit of truth. Make it your mission to seek knowledge, to learn as much as you can. If you're in the paranormal research field, knowledge is power. You're going into a situation fully loaded, rammed up. Again, folks, knowledge is our invisible cloak of armor. We are geared up and ready. And this is just another food for thought, making you ponder, making you want to learn more about how ancient civilizations have a lot to teach us. We have a lot to learn from them in modern times. Again, does Atlantis have a connection to Ecuador and the Amazon? I certainly think so, and I think Father Carlos Crespi was given a unique privilege by the indigenous people who claim these treasures lay in underground caves. And a question is, why isn't the government or the Vatican allowing us to view these treasures that could certainly give us messages, images of knowledge from the past, folks? Take care.